It's 400 AD, in what will one day become Great Britain, and the Romans have just left. The population that remains is joined by other peoples arriving in increasing numbers from across the sea. And in this world, a mysterious artifact is created.
Here is an image made of the earth, totally transcends, I think, language, but also, I think, transcends nationality. It's about the body language, it's about this, and that kind of sense of fear, and that's the thing that moves me about it. I'm very pleased to meet him.
This is made in the period once known as the Dark Ages. But in reality, it's a time of glittering art and extraordinary fusions.
It's a story of cultures coming together. It's a story of change.
It's a story of fractures and shocks and discontinuity.
A tumultuous time from which only fragments of art survive. Art that reveals a story of battles and invasions, the rise of a new language, the spread of a new faith.
You need go no further to see the sparkle and the turbulence of the period.
The English fight the English fight the Welsh, the pagan English and the Christian Welsh fight the English Christians. Everyone fights everyone.
How do you convey the meanings of your people? You do it through cultural artifacts, don't you? How do you carry the memories of your people? You do it through stories.
This is the first chapter of an epic journey. Across 1,500 years, through 8 dramatic turning points of history, as contemporary artists and thinkers encounter artworks that defined their age.
Man, can he paint?
Exploring extraordinary creations from around the UK.
What I love about it, it looks like the deck of a ship.
The work of past visionaries, mavericks, and rule breakers who responded to their times and shaped the future.
Yeah, got it. This is it.
Oh, look at that. I want to cry.
Tracing a story of creativity, revealing an alternative history of these islands told through art.
The thing that interests me about this is this kind of questioning, uncertainty. I mean, it's extraordinary, really. And I hadn't quite realized how, in a way, existential the work was.
Named after Spong Hill in Norfolk, where it was unearthed, this early 5th century sculpture is a unique find. Made by migrants from northern Europe and southern Scandinavia, who today we call the Anglo-Saxons.
Spong Man is a 3-dimensional clay figure that would originally have sat on top of a cremation urn.
It's a fantastic starting point in talking about creativity because of its simplicity, because, bluntly, anybody could have tried to have made it.
It's a record of what the people who would one day call themselves the English were doing or thinking when they first came to these islands. It's the earliest Anglo-Saxon sculpture. There's nothing like it for hundreds of years either.
And here an object stands in that darkness and speaks to us so profoundly about common experience.
Sir Antony Gormley's studies in the human form have created landmarks across 21st century Britain. Art that communicates something of the ideas and values of our own times.
The whole point of making something for the maker is to, in some way, communicate with somebody that they will never meet. Somebody that might live in a different continent, might live in a different millennia. The potential of sculpture to have a conversation with people that haven't been born yet is an incredibly powerful thing for me. So I made this during lockdown, and I think that there's a sort of cousin relationship with Spong. So, you know, he's considerably more depressed than Spong, but it's doing the same job. That amazing, unbroken history of making that this island has been involved in.
The Anglo-Saxons who make Spong Man are part of an influx of immigrants pushing inland through the Isles, driving the peoples already here to the north and west. But these indigenous peoples' ancient visual and verbal cultures still survive, like this lullaby in Old Welsh.
O groen by lot bandraith, chwyd, chwydogaeth, gochanon, gochenin, wyth gaeth.
Artist and performer Sean Parry is based in Llandudno, a modern-day celebrant of ancient language and cultures.
Gelwi gogoiwog, gif, gaf, dali, dahali, dug, dug. Ni anghai, och ni ovai, line.
The lines in between what is Welsh and what is British, they're kind of blurred in a way. I've studied the different Celtic styles. I absolutely love how the artists of the time mixed together so beautifully the knots and the key patterns and the swirls. All of these artworks, they lead your eye on a journey. It's the same journey today just as it was back then. British culture doesn't start with the Anglo-Saxons.
A Gododdin, or the Gododdin, is a poem attributed to an early Welsh bard called Aneurin. It's preserved in a 13th century manuscript.
The people of the Gododdin are survivors of the cultures which resist the encroaching Anglo-Saxons all across lowland Britain, the cultural ancestors of the modern Welsh. And this poem is a lament to their doomed struggle.
It's a poem all about the glory of losing well rather than winning badly.
Gododdin, I sing your epitaph in the hall before the hearth, here before the gathered throng, where our soldier poet sang, firewood burning dusk to dawn, the portal lit
for a passing pilgrim. It was meant to be sung, spoken, performed to a group of people, and not just any group of people. You know, these are the people that he's talking about, in a sense.
So when you read it aloud, you are really gripped by it and actually sends shivers down your spine.
And it would have been raucous, and he would have had to have really held a crowd. Men rode to Catraeth, fearless, crazed with mead.
I sing their praise. War dogs battling in grim rows with bloody blue-blade spears.
These men that we hear about, the Gododdin, feasted for a year before they went off and marched to the battle.
To defend their lands against the incoming Angles, against the incoming Germanic heathen tribes.
And that's not just because they wanted to get, you know, off their faces before they went off. There was always something holy happening there, and a lot of things going on there, but it wasn't just let's get drunk and have a fight.
Of Bryneich's tribe, oh, my heart breaks. Not one man left alive.
It just comes alive as it is being performed.
300 men called up to war. And after joy, the hush of death.
The Gododdin is sometimes described as the earliest masterpiece of British literature, but in fact 3 nations could lay claim on it. It's written by a poet, Aneirin, known in Wales, but who lived at the time in what is today Edinburgh. It describes events that took place in northeast England, but the language is, of course, Welsh.
And you think, why is that? How is that? Well, Wales and Welsh-speaking Wales is a small remnant of a far wider culture.
It was the language of the British Isles, as far north as Edinburgh, as far east as Yorkshire, and it is the same language that we speak today.
Grydwyf gŵr oedd gwas, gŵr hynt am dias, merch mwydd myngfras, a danfodrwyd my garwas. Ysgwyd ysgein lledan, a bedrain mein fian. Cledewr glas glân, effyr eir affan. Neb I ef a fi, ceser I oedd a thi. Gwech gwneud a thi, a wawt dy I oli.
The fact that it is 14 centuries old now, and yet somehow, through this extraordinary chain of singing and listening, and singing back and listening, and then eventually being written down, that is something that moves and echoes through our history in Wales. The Welsh story is one of fractures and shocks and discontinuity. But nevertheless, language itself is absolutely at the heart of Welsh identity.
But it is the Anglo-Saxons who write the chronicles in their new English language, and they offer most of the sparse written history we have from the period.
In Great Britain, the Celts have certainly been written out of culture and history because history is always written by the victors, and it's the Anglo-Saxons who won.
Other lost kingdoms lie beyond the borders of Anglo-Saxon England. To the north, the Picts are the largest, but they leave no written records at all. Only mysterious memories of paganism and power battles with the Anglo-Saxons, carved in stone.
The Aberlemno Stones are 4 carved monumental stones in eastern Scotland.
There are 3 along a kind of ridge that has a road running through it, and 1 in the churchyard. We don't know what they're for. We think they are marking something.
The orthodoxy has been that the Aberlemno Stones commemorate the Battle of Donegal Moss Nechtonsmere, but I'm not sure that anybody quite knows is the truth of the matter. They are like so much of Pictish Scotland, are a mystery.
This is like minimalism in a way. This is research for us because we're getting ideas from it. It helps our work. It's beautiful, simple design.
The artistic duo Louise Scullion and Matthew Dalziel live and work nearby.
You kind of confront this object in the landscape and almost like meeting an alien. They're not speaking English to us, they're speaking stone and symbolism and texture. These are incredible examples of how objects work and how they communicate.
They are amazing sights, standing on a hill, the skies and the trees and the ground beneath them. These things were performance pieces.
Just like the makers of the ancient stones, Dalziel and Scullion create public art that interacts with the landscape.
We're lucky enough to be asked to respond to places, to kind of try and absorb what's unique about those places and try and reflect that in our work.
We've evolved a little bit, but we've still a lot in common with people who lived thousands of years ago. All these things are a great resource for creating new design and creating new sculptures. They're living, working things.
The massive stone known as Aberlemno II tells a wordless story of pagan warriors on one side and the beginning of a Christian tradition on the other. And it predates this churchyard by around 1,000 years.
If the stones do date from the 7th century, Christianity had made its way into parts of Scotland at that time.
2 of them are pre-Christian, so they don't have any Christian imagery. And then we start to see the Christian ones going up, also with the Pictish symbols, so they are a hybrid. When they become Christian, they don't feel that they have to destroy these older stones. Just because your grandpa wasn't Christian doesn't mean you hate your grandpa. So you're willing to sort of keep him on the stone and keep his memory.
This represents a period of crossover between enforcing a kind of Christian belief on top of a more pagan belief. So I guess you would have to really cleverly overlap those things. You can't help but think of the person drawing that out and the decisions they've had to make.
Aberlemno II shows conflict as well as creative fusion. For some 500 years, multiple regional powers wrestle for control all over the British Isles. These are kingdoms, not countries, warring tribes, not nations. In a time before modern maps, they follow long-lost flags.
The reason why we don't remember the kings of England before 1066 is there are so many of them. Seriously. Everybody's negotiating the borders of their territory. Nobody knows where their territory is. And for that reason, people are always jostling. Of course, they're always jostling for power.
The English fight the English fight the Welsh fight the Irish, the English and the Welsh fight the Irish, the pagan English and the Christian Welsh fight the English Christians. Everyone fights everyone, and no one gives a damn about anyone's alleged ethnic belonging.
The result is the buried treasure of storybooks, the glittering product of culture clash.
It's been buried, it's been kept secret. I think that's what makes it extraordinary. I like the mystery of it. Things that are forgotten and brought to light. And then we try and make sense of it.
the Staffordshire hoard is discovered in 2009. More than 4,000 pieces of gold and silver wrenched off weapons and war gear.
I like that. I like that about the Staffordshire hoard. No namby-pamby stuff here. It's not all jewellery and nice stuff.
Artist Cornelia Parker has come to the Potteries Museum in Stoke-on-Trent to feast her eyes.
So we've picked out some of the highlights from the hoard here. There's about 4,500 fragments in the hoard,
Wow.
most of which are incredibly tiny, down to,
Yes.
tiny rivets and pins and scraps of silver and gold. I think a good one to get going with would be something like this.
Ooh, beautiful.
They're all, to most extent, quite damaged, quite twisted, and as you can see here.
You start noticing pretty quickly, hang on, all these items are broken. Why are they broken?
It contains fittings from dozens of swords that would have been treasures of the time. These are Excalibur-type swords. I mean, that's their resonance. That's what they look like.
They've not just looted this material, they've destroyed it.
There's something deeply exciting about the idea that there, in a field in Staffordshire, there is millions of pounds worth of gold just lying there.
About 4,500 fragments in the hoard, most of which are...
Cornelia Parker's art deals with changing the nature of objects, investing old things with new meanings.
I like the mutability of metals, and I love scrap gold and silver.
In 1988, she flattened hundreds of pieces of silver plate with the help of a friend and his steamroller.
All these other friends of his all appeared with their children and sandwiches and everything, and they came to watch it happening. This is what I made with it. So all the silver was all broken, and then I had to place the silver on pieces of paper and draw plans, because they all had little holes drilled in them so they could be suspended.
But it was this explosive work from 1991 that really made her name.
This is my now infamous piece called Coal Dot Matter and Exploded View, and it's otherwise known as the Exploded Shed. It was a garden shed blown up for me by the British Army, and then I suspended the fragments in the space, sort of reverse archaeology, really. So broken things seem to appeal to me for some reason. So I have been on digs. Working alongside archaeologists is quite remarkable. I'm thinking a lot about art and archaeology and about the links between them. So you dig away and more layers keep emerging. Like you know that something's buried and you're not sure what it is, but you've got a good chance of finding something. And as an artist, that's what you're doing. You're kind of mining your subconscious, sometimes unsuccessfully. The metaphors around archaeology are great, I think.
It's the biggest hoard of gold and silver objects to have been discovered to date. Maybe it was nicked. Maybe someone was belting down the road with a couple of saddlebags full of hot gear. Maybe they got caught up and the memory of where this stuff had been hidden, the third bush on the left on the Roman road towards Stafford, was lost.
When I first saw it in the flesh rather than just photos, was all laid out, just table after table of objects. I was in there with a load of other scholars and we were all walking along trying not to drool too much.
The detail in the way the gold and garnet in particular is done is extraordinary. There are probably a handful of people who knew how to do this in Anglo-Saxon England through the 7th century.
The lovely thing about this object is you've got both the cloisonné garnet work and the filigree wire work represented in one object, never two main decorative styles in the hoard. So the garnet work, you've got these individual slices of red garnet that have been cut exact to size and inserted into these gold cells.
Right.
And each of those cells is backed with a piece of gold foil as well.
Wow,
which
make
acts
it
a bit like a
more luminous.
Yeah, a bit like a bike reflector.
When it came to metalworking, the level of detail in some of the jewellery, you wouldn't find anything to better that.
You've got the filigree work in the centre with these twisted beaded wires soldered into position in these kind of interlacing twisted
How
patterns.
were they made, the beaded wires?
They would draw out a gold wire.
Yes.
Using just hand tools and putting these tiny notches to give the impression of individual beads, although that is a single piece of wire with just those beads put in, and then twisting that into pattern and soldering it on.
How beautiful.
Into position.
Even today, museums have tried. They've gone to modern-day jewelers and said, can you do this? And some of the best jewelers in the world have said, no, we just can't. We don't know how they did it. And how they did it in those conditions, I can't imagine.
And one of the most amazing pieces of wargear in the hoard is a rather magnificent helmet.
Oh,
which
lovely.
this is a cheek piece.
Beautiful.
So you can see how it was. That's kind of the outer curve. And you've got, again, some elements of wire work around some of the edges.
Going into battle wearing this bling, it's actually going to help you survive, because if they're wearing the bling in battle and they lose, they hold out their arms covered in gold and say, look, I'm worth ransoming. You don't go killing me. You keep me alive, you get a payoff. You kill the rest, but not me.
It's a precious and huge opportunity to understand more about the turbulence of the 7th century, which is a time when kingdoms are emerging. You've got Christianity really beginning to get established.
But the written word, in any language, is still in short supply.
This is what's known as the inscribed strip. The only piece of the hoard of any writing on it's a Latin inscription that calls upon God to destroy your enemies and drive them away. And this is a time when you've got both pagan and Christian kingdoms at war.
Where it was found, it's more or less on the juncture of two of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and it seems quite likely to think this is actually the hoard which King Penda, the last pagan king in England, took from the defeated Northumberlands, and in front of all his pagan warriors had smashed up and chopped and said, this is just scrap gold for us now. They are gone.
But the smashing of the hoard does not end the rise of Northumbria. This northern powerhouse will create the artworks that help define our understanding of the age, through artists armed with Christianity and literacy.
Christianity is one of the great religions of the book, so it brings book technology with it. It brings Bibles. They carry the word of God made manifest, made visible. From a cultural point of view, wow. From a linguistic point of view, wow.
Oh my goodness. I mean, this is just, and it's, I'm trying to imagine what it would have been like for somebody in the 8th century to have laid eyes on this extraordinary, jewel-bright, unimaginably intricate decoration.
And doesn't it project the idea of mystery? It's something beyond the pass of human understanding.
Exactly. There's something about the unsearchable wisdom of God is
Yeah.
somehow indicated, isn't it, by this incredibly intricate. I mean, I'm trying to get in close to see it, but it's astonishing.
The Reverend Richard Coles has written extensively on the lives of early British monks. Professor Richard Gameson is an expert on one of their greatest masterpieces. This is a high-quality replica. The original is now too fragile to be filmed.
I mean, this is just flabbergasting, and you can see why it does look like something that's been almost arithmetically worked out on a loom.
Indeed, and you can deconstruct the geometry. There are geometrical principles, inversion, reverse, that are followed here, but you still need to have the artistic talent and fluidity to make it work.
It was a highly visual culture. When many people were illiterate, you could use visual imagery of any kind, even ornament, to impress the heathens, to try to convert them to Christianity. And if they see these incredibly beautiful manuscripts, it can be very impressive.
They've made their pigments very, very well. The monks of Lindisfarne weren't just spiritual, they weren't just calligraphers, they were also very good chemists who understood what could and couldn't be done.
Your senses are overwhelmed and everything is whirling and twirling until you feel like you're whirling and twirling and you feel disoriented and lost, and it's about being overwhelmed by God. They're about as pristine as an object from that period gets. The vellum is snow white. The colors, they are incredible, they're subtle, they're incredibly varied. This is a real technological accomplishment to create that range of colors and have them preserved.
We think of communication in terms of how many people can we reach now? But the monks of Lindisfarne, they are making a book for eternity, thinking how many people will I reach in 1,000 years, 2,000 years? And it's an interesting question, how many people have seen the Lindisfarne Gospels over the last 1,300 years?
Although the arduous prep work at the priory that once stood here was almost certainly a team effort, experts now think that the actual calligraphy and illumination was all done by one man, the abbot of Lindisfarne, named Eadfrith.
The monks lived and worked here, and somewhere on the range, the scriptorium. And that would be where the Gospels, that's where Eadfrith would sit or stand at a bench and do the work. This is where the ceremonies of the church would take place. So on either side of here, this is the choir, and on either side you would have monks who would chant the sacred scriptures.
And the abbot says, I'm bringing it out. You know, this is it. So he pulls out this fantastic manuscript, reveals it out of its box, which might have been jeweled, and it is like opening a door.
And there's something, I think, about that action of opening a gospel book, richly decorated gospel book, and on these kind of glowing, extraordinarily beautiful pages, that story lifting up off the page and into the hearts and the minds and the souls of those who are around it. There's something really powerful about that. We know that heaven is portrayed as a place of jeweled sumptuousness. So if you are trying to give people in this life a glimpse of what lies beyond, you would build magnificently. You would paint richly. You would ornament gorgeously. Because what you're giving people is a sense of the heaven that awaits them, provided they satisfy the T's and C's.
We think of Lindisfarne as a remote place cut off by the tides. But by sea, members of that monastic community could travel. They could go to Rome, and they went further east as well, and the monastery was established by an Irish monk, and he brought with him the Irish visual traditions. We see the interlacing, the spirals, we see the Celtic art. But mixed with that, we have other influences from Europe.
As a historian who practices what I call entangled history, where everything is connected, I have to say, of course, this is a hybrid culture. But then there are no pure cultures in this world. Everything is influenced by everything else.
It's written in Latin because that's the language of power and of magic, practically. To hear priests chanting away the language of Rome on Lindisfarne, it just must have been an unearthly experience.
In 793, more strangers come ashore. Pagan Vikings, who threaten to destroy the link Christianity has forged between writing and art.
The so-called waves of Vikings Vikings always come in waves, people looking to make money, people looking for land.
You might get your home burned and all your treasure stolen, and indeed you might yourself be carried off as a slave. And that's the downside of being a monk.
The Gospels are spirited inland and hidden from the Viking raiders. And when they come to Durham Cathedral some 300 years after they were first made, something new and significant has been added: writing in the English language.
What's so interesting is they were using it in the 10th century, but their response to its power was, okay, let's add in English now to the Latin, which would seem to us like scribbling over a sacred manuscript, but to me says, whoa, English is important enough that you can put it in one of your sacred manuscripts.
We're always told now not to write in books, but boy, am I pleased when I find somebody who wrote on a book in the past, because it tells you so much about readership and about the use of a book, even one that was as stunning and stellar and as important as the Lindisfarne Gospels. The earliest copy of the Gospels in English.
Those in power started to realise they could exert more control over their peoples if they all spoke the same language. Latin was a hard sell, but English wasn't, because they were already speaking it. So English became the language of those people, who then called themselves the English.
This new spoken language, based on foreign dialects, will help form something homegrown: the first English literature and the first English poem.
Where I'm from, I'm the strongest and the boldest and the bravest and the best. Yes, I mean, I may have bathed in the blood of beasts, netted 5 foul ogres at once, smashed my way into a troll den and come out swinging, gone skinny dipping in a sleeping sea and made sashimi of some sea monsters. Anyone who fucks with the Geats, bro, they have to fuck with me. I'm Maria Devana Headley. I'm a novelist, and my connection to Beowulf is that I wrote a new translation of Beowulf. I had the experience of encountering it as a high school student in America and thought it should be better. It was a very dry translation, a kind of Victorian translation. It haunted me. My feeling of irritation that it should be better haunted me for 20 years.
The thought on funda, say the fela aro, modes mirtha, mana kuna, furena yefremeda, he fag with God.
It's a story that is full of emotional trigger points for a culture like ours continues to be, because we built it off of these stories.
There are 30,000 lines of Old English poetry surviving, and yet there's only one that we ever remember, and that's Beowulf.
We call it our national epic, which is quite strange when you think about it, because we can't understand a word of it.
So it's a one-off. In many ways, it's a one-off.
It's written in English, an English we English can no longer understand at all. A German has more chance of understanding Beowulf than we do.
Lichsa yabad, atolaglaka. Him on yaxle, weath sindol sweertol, sinuon sprungen, bursten danlokan. Beowulf, weath guthreth givede.
A mishmash of pagan, of Christian, of English and Scandinavian, and is actually set in southern Sweden, because that's the area where the Anglo-Saxons continued to think of as their ancestral homeland.
Beowulf is not a Viking story. It's much earlier than the peoples that we recognise as the Vikings.
Written evidence of the narrative and linguistic DNA of Englishness, Beowulf has been translated hundreds of times and spawned 3 major movies. Now there's a video game based on this ancient story of the archetypal hero.
The plot of Beowulf can be summarised quite quickly.
hero goes into the service of a local king who's being haunted by a dreadful monster.
The monster basically comes to a hall and eats people every night for 12 years. Eventually, a young guy, probably about 18 years old, in Denmark hears about this monster and thinks, I'm going to go kill that monster.
Hero enters the culture.
Beowulf comes in and he says, I'm the hero. I'm your hero. I'm here. I'm in my armor. I'm ready.
He kills the monster. He kills the monster's mother. He then becomes king himself.
The third section of the poem is 50 years later. Beowulf is now the old king, and he decides to fight a dragon. He and the dragon smash against each other, and both of them die.
Okay, well, that's the plot of every video game in town. It's not interesting, except in the way that story is told.
Most of us are unlikely to memorize long-form poetry, but lots of us could do, like, a rap that we heard when we were 13 or recently. Under a new moon, Grendel set out to see what horde haunted this hall. He found the Ringdanes drunk, doused down, making beds of benches. They were mead-medicated, untroubled by pain, their sleep untainted by sorrow. Grendel hurt, and so he hunted. The way that I use alliteration in my translation is in more of a kind of hip-hop rap kind of phrasing. So the same reason, though, it's to keep it memorable, to keep it stick in the brain, earwormy.
Rhythm and rhyme will get you every time, so it is like rap. So you need a beat and you need a rhyme.
Mechanisms that would help people remember great chunks off by heart.
And you can also make it up, because if you have only one written version of an account, you can keep composing on the beat. You just keep it going.
Freestyling.
Yeah.
A text this vigorous has to feel vigorous. It has to feel like a living text. And so my goal was to really make it feel alive and make it feel like something that people would be riveted listening to. Reading other translations, I thought, oh, this is such a dude kind of story. And the first word of Beowulf is what.
What?
Which is a sort of let me have the floor kind of word.
What?
Seamus Heaney translates it as so, which is coming out of the Irish tradition, storytelling tradition. And I decided to translate it as bro.
What?
Bro. Tell me we still know how to speak of kings. To say bro and claim the floor and then tell the story in the register of, oh my God, you can't believe what my dude did. You can't believe it. I'm gonna tell you the story. Stop, you have to listen. His words were heard and heralded, and yes, bro, the man was more than just talk. He gave good gifts. His war-wedded wore king's rings and drank their leaders' mead. Nightly he feted his fight family with fortunes.
Then as now, people are being shown a world where the choices are really clear and really drastic. There is good and evil, there is Beowulf versus the dragon, there is light and dark and life and death. That's why people liked it then, and that's why people like it now.
It's about how do you get status? How do you stay good if you get status? What happens if you are the king and you screw up and you don't own your crimes? Do you fall apart? Do you become evil? Are you a monster now? The societies that we've built are based on stories like these. They've come up and made us attempt to understand how to have power.
In the centuries leading up to 1066, the rough boundaries of England, Wales, and Scotland are becoming established. But nationality then and now has always been about more than language or lines on a map, as information artist and journalist David McCandless explains.
I'm from England, so there's England. Okay, so I can be English. If I add Scotland and Wales, then I live in Great Britain. Okay, but then Great Britain is also part of the United Kingdom, which necessitates adding Northern Ireland. Then that constitutes then the British Islands, which adds Isle of Man, Jersey, Guernsey. We need to add Ireland as well into that, and then we can say we live in the British Isles. So all those nested inside each other. So when you say you're British or you come from the British Isles, where are you placing yourself?
David has developed a new kind of visual language with his books Information is Beautiful and Knowledge is Beautiful.
I felt like there was more and more information in the world, but I felt like I knew less and less. I felt dumber and dumber. So I thought, oh, we live in an information age. Maybe we need new kinds of maps to navigate this age, information maps. Not maps of terrain, but maps of topics and areas and questions and places in my mind that I felt there were gaps terrain I hadn't explored.
This is a glorious tradition that stretches all the way back to the 11th century. By the time this ancient map is commissioned, possibly by the court of King Canute, there is a growing sense of a wider world beyond these shores, of places with written names that need to be mapped.
The Mappa Mundi is a map of the world, that's what it means. It shows topography, it shows cities, it shows the sea.
It does not look like a modern map. It's the first representation, the earliest representation of Britain and Iceland and Ireland and the Isle of Man.
It shows that we're part of Christendom, but we're also on the edge of it. You know, we are an outpost of a great civilization. That's a really interesting comment on how people felt about themselves. Part of it, but the kind of the outlier, the most extreme fortress of it, perhaps. We're a long way from Jerusalem, right at the end of the world.
I have to say, I don't recognize this world. Whereas England, for example, or Britain.
Britain is right down here in the lower left-hand corner. Unlike most maps that we're familiar with, it doesn't have north at the top, so it has India at the top, and it says, here lions abound.
It's almost like there's a mythological layer and there's a geographical layer.
Exactly. These grey areas represent the sea, and the green areas are ranges of mountains, and the red are rivers.
It really is them trying to make sense of the world, but they do throw everything into these maps. They're maps not only of place, they're maps of time.
It looks like a map, it feels like a map, but it's also like very conceptual. There's a lot of ideas in it. So is it a map of ideas or is it a map of places?
Well, I think it's a compendium of all sorts of information that the map maker wanted to convey, and it presents a view of the known world at that time.
I don't think they ever thought anybody would probably use that map to try to get to Rome or Jerusalem. I love to sail, but I'd never sail by that map. But you have to think, if you were to draw a map, you'd probably be able to draw your neighborhood pretty well, and then everything else would be a bit kind of thinly imagined. What's interesting, though, is it would tell me everything I need to know about you. It would tell me what you're interested in, and what you know, and what mattered to you.
It's almost like we're going back into the mind of the person from that era, right?
Exactly. It reflected the perspective of the person who created it.
It points to a Britain that is very much part of a wider European story. It may not always be the main actor in that European story, but it is part of that story.
The geographical accuracy sort of goes to a point, and then it sort of there's a sort of frontier, and then it starts to crumble and become more mythological. And you can really feel that's like the frontier of their understanding. You can see their understanding sort of darkening, and these myths sort of seeping in to fill in the gaps.
Mappa Mundi strives to be objective, but actually it's all about imagination. It's a reflection of how its Anglo-Saxon makers perceive their world, and it does show unmistakably these islands surrounded by water that protects them and also invites invasion.
I remember studying this at school, and it was one of those things that was just another detail, really. Something that happened a long time ago that didn't mean that much to us. So there wasn't much sense of connection to it, but I love it now. I'm Woodrow Phoenix. I write and draw comics.
As a graphic novelist, Phoenix creates a visual story when there are no words.
This totally is a comic strip. It's a very effective one. They're trying to keep things obvious, trying to keep things simple, trying to keep things direct so that you can always figure out where you are and know who's doing what.
The Bayeux Tapestry, which tells the story of the Norman conquest, ironically, was almost certainly made in Anglo-Saxon England. Anglo-Saxon England was famous for its embroideries in particular.
This is visual propaganda. William the Conqueror claimed the crown had been promised to him, not King Harold. So he leads an army across the Channel to seize it.
The details build up to this irresistible claim to truth. Why it was right, or why it was even inevitable that this small band of French-speaking adventurers now own the whole of this rich kingdom across the Channel. It's like a medieval graphic novel in needlework.
So this is She Lives, which is a book that I made completely myself by hand. There's only one of them, and it was done as a kind of experiment in storytelling. I thought that one way to make a silent comic that would be more readable would be to make it really, really big. So the whole thing becomes like a performance. You can only see this in this form. You have to go to where the book is. You can't take it home and look at it. The link between this work and this work is just the idea that you've made this story that comes to life when people come to look at it together and they experience it together.
The original still rests in the French town that gave it its name. This is a full-scale replica at Reading Museum in England, made by Victorians working in an ancient visual language developed for people who couldn't read.
At 70 meters long, it was designed to fill an enormous space. It's a great spectacle, but it's also portable. You can roll it up and you can display it in several locations. You could have taken it all around Anglo-Saxon England to display your triumph before shipping it to Normandy.
There's a kind of performance aspect to any kind of public art. It's an event. You have to kind of submit to the artwork.
The tapestry shows the lead-up to the Norman conquest, with very few words at all. And it's the final, brutal battle of Hastings that needs the least explanation.
There's the main action happening in the middle of the frame, and at the top and bottom you have these decorative friezes, really, of just all kinds of stuff. It's just adding some decoration. But at this point, when the battle starts, suddenly this underneath becomes a repository for all the bodies that are being slaughtered in the battle.
This gives you the sense of fighting, unable to be contained by a mere tapestry.
It goes from being just a bit of decoration to actually being part of the story. So it's a really, really powerful kind of graphic idea. I love it. I mean, one of the basic principles of cartooning is that when you're drawing, you're not drawing what things look like, you're drawing what they feel like. So here, they've realized that if they just tip the horses up, they can get some action in and they can make this thing feel more exciting and more surprising.
The good historian in the 11th century was the one who told his or her story in the most compelling way. The Bayeux Tapestry was the best history you could possibly create in the 11th century.
Now, the shipping forecast issued by the Met Office on behalf of the...
But now, almost 1,000 years later, another small army of English women is sowing a sequel. telling the story of what happened next when the Normans continued their conquest of Britain.
Expected Biscay 1019 by the same time.
Our ladies have clocked up literally thousands of hours in producing their own version of the Norwich tapestry. I was talking to my mum one night about our project. We couldn't then get out of producing a little part of the new embroidery herself. So poor old mum became involved, like it or not.
I've spent 585 hours so far. If any of us had known quite how long it was going to take, it might have put a lot more people off.
It takes an hour to do about a square inch. I'm amazed at how they did it. It's just a case of getting through it, but I think they were amazing what they did when they had, say, no glasses, no light. I wish we could know exactly who they were. That would be fascinating.
Being able to understand that a person, a human being like you, did this thing, and you want to get clues as to how they did that. That's what you're looking at when you're looking at artwork. You're looking at all those things that people did and how they did them. We want to see the marks, we want to see the tools. We want to see how things were done.
Ah, I'm so pleased with it.
I think it looks wonderful.
Yes, yes. I hope other people are going to like it too.
Captioned in Latin, commissioned by the French, made in Britain by the descendants of Germanic peoples, the Bayer Tapestry is the last great Anglo-Saxon artwork, a hybrid creation of more than 600 years of history. That's what makes it English.
People find their way to this work. They've been finding their way to this work for hundreds of years. That says something.
Objects reflect not just who people are at the time, but also very much an accumulation of belonging and identity. The Britishness or Englishness or Scottishness or Welshness that comes with the object that they're making.
There's an amazement, I think, in seeing that continuity over 15 centuries. There is a sense of pride in that.
To us.
Next time, the Black Death brings devastation to the Isles. But out of chaos comes creative renewal. When did you last subvert the status quo? Be inspired by some of the incredible but overlooked individuals who disrupted history with their creativity. Go to bbc.co.uk/art that made us and follow the links to the Open University.